Hi everyone, welcome to today's Sci-Tech Asia virtual seminar, which is part of the Innovation, Automation and Digital Economy webinar series. My name's James Wright. I'm a research associate at the Alan Turing Institute in London, which is the UK's National Institute for Data Science and AI. And I'm very excited to introduce our speaker today, Dr. Seonsam, who's going to be talking about population aging and medical robotics, an exploration of robot-assisted rehabilitation in South Korea. So Seonsam has a really interesting background. He holds a doctorate in social anthropology from the University of Oxford, and he's also a physician practicing Korean medicine and working at a hospital near Seoul, specializing in the rehabilitation of patients with neurological conditions. And he's also affiliated with the Institute of Medical History at Yonsei University College of Medicine as visiting professor. And his research covers a wide range of subjects, including medical politics, artificial intelligence and robotics, Christian healing, social ontology, and Guillain-Barré syndrome. And finally, Seonsam's published in a number of different venues, including Korean Journal of Philosophy of Medicine, Harvard Asia Quarterly, Korean Studies, and Medicine Anthropology Theory. And very excitingly, he's got a monograph project underway based on his DPhil, which explores the broad contours of medical politics and contemporary dynamics of social change in South Korea, which I'm very much looking forward to reading when it's published. So just to remind everyone that the talk's being recorded and live streamed on Facebook. And please feel free to add any questions that you may have into the comments during the talk, and we'll have questions at the end. So Seonsam, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you very much for kind introduction, James. Thanks for inviting me, organizers of the webinar series. I'm especially Dr. Gonzalo Santos and James Wright. Before I start reading my paper, I'm going to say a little bit about our background, because this project is a collaboration between me and Eunjung Ma, who is in the audience now. We both have been working on Korean health systems for some time independently, and Dr. Ma has been working in science and technology studies, and me has been working on anthropology field. And at similar times, we both have developed interest in population aging. So we came across this field of care and rehab robotics. So I thought that this field gonna be a really interesting venue for collaboration. So we decided to collaborate on rehab robotics in South Korea. And James really initiated a formal collaboration some years ago, and pulling together researchers working on Korea and Japan, working on care robotics and AI. So we have been part of that project. So this is our personal side of background, and the research side of background of our research is rehab robotics or medical robotics in general, especially anthropological ethnographic research. And the field has been quite scant. So as far as I know, I mean, there might be other projects ongoing that I don't know of, but I could find only just two ethnographic papers. One is on the KIST, developed by Korean Institute of Science Technology, a robot called the Silbot, that was applied in Denmark, the elderly center. But that focuses more about the human robot interaction rather than ethnographic endeavor per se. And other one, which is properly ethnographic sociological approach to rehab robotics, which I will deal in this paper. They focus on Locomed, which is the most famous gait training robot developed by Hokoma, based in Swiss. But the company has been recently acquired by Chinese. So it's basically a Chinese company. And they have been doing research on the rehab sessions that are taking place in Turkey. But their focus was more on body normalities and drawing mainly disability studies. So we thought that why not? We're going on rehab robots in Korea, context of Korea. So like I said, James has kind of introduced me, and briefly on myself is just I'm Doctor of Korean Medicine, and we are associated practice the traditional Asian medicine, which is, and other therapies expanded from, which is umbrella term is Korean medicine, but within a biomedicine-based institutional framework. So we are mainstream doctors. So we have MDs and dentists and Korean medicine, Doctor of Korean medicine, or similar same educational qualifications and trainings, and the similar socioeconomic status, etc., etc. And then actually MDs have 100,000 people, MDs, and there are 25,000 and about 25,000 similar Doctor of Korean medicine. So there are smaller number of physicians. So dentists, Doctor of Korean medicine, a smaller number of sort of mainstream doctors along with the MDs. So I'm going to read my paper now. The discourse of population aging drives growth in care and rehabilitation robotics. However, the sector is also driven by clinical insight, such as positive evidence regarding the application of robots in patient rehabilitation. And behind these studies highlighting robots' benefits lies the notion of neuroplasticity, whereby the depth of an area in the neural network is claimed to be compensated by alternative pathways generated by repeated exercises involving the affected limbs. Based on fieldwork conducted in rehab hospitals and centers in South Korea, this paper explores the socio-technical imaginaries concerning these robots as they emerge in the intersection of societal challenges, scientific theorization, and clinical practice. Specifically, it unravels how the pressures of population aging, the disciplinary identity of rehabilitation medicine, and the aspirations of the state clinicians, engineers, and patients are all intertwined to drive the deployment of rehabilitation robots. So we have been doing fieldwork for like past 2 years, but the fieldwork itself is quite challenging because, as you know, the world has been under COVID constrictions. So it was quite hard to do the data gathering, but we ended up still managed to visit many places like a theme park, and the museums, and service, the restaurants and other places where they advertise robot services, and rehab hospitals and disability centers and things like that. But still, I'm still tested once a week now for coronavirus. So that's the sort of a kind of like a regime that we are under in South Korea. So this means that we have a really hard time to getting access to rehabilitation hospitals, either staff and the patients and the physicians as well, because they are being tested once a week, like myself. So we did in-depth interviews, but we still do more on this. And we do the observations for robot-assisted sessions in rehab hospitals and the disability centers. And I also conducted a small survey on the 17 physical therapists actually working in our hospital. And then we also visit various places where robot discourse are quite prominent, or where robot services are being advertised, or robot services are being applied. So this paper begins with an overview of the medical artificial intelligence and robotics field to explore robot-assisted rehabilitation, We then highlight the disciplinary history of rehab medicine and its unique identity, straddling medical and social care, before investigating how it has become the receptacle of the socio-technical imaginaries centered on the digital economy and the associated political technological project. In doing so, we emphasize the uniform ways in which robot therapists draw on the principle of neuroplasticity to serve engineering initiatives and give scientific respectability to rehab medicine. Exploring the perspectives of patients and therapists is subsequently reveals that although many accept those imaginaries in which robots act as a friendly companion, there are occasions where those imaginaries are disrupted. Finally, the research findings are contextualized in the broader landscape of debates on the futures mediated by digital technology, medical robotics in South Korea. We draw on Paul Ricoeur's distinction on social imaginaries between the ideological and utopian variants, the former being the kind that reproduce the existing order and the latter being the one that questions the former, to highlight the nature of tensions created in their interstices. And I'm going to start with, if you look at the previous slides, if you look at the clinical reviews, then robot therapies are generally considered to be quite effective during the subacute stages, which means that the three months to six months window from the disease onset. So if, for example, if you have got a stroke, the general overview, the consensus is that if you do the robot therapy between the 3 months after your disease started and 6 months, because after 6 months is considered to be more fixed. So it took longer than to recover any kind of functions you have. And between, under the 3 months, you think it's a bit too early. So if you look at the many reviews, then it's all, so they say effective in the subacute stage. So that's kind of like a clinical evidence that are appearing in the literature. So I'll begin with the artificial intelligence robotics in medicine. Since its Dartmouth's beginning, AI research has gone through ups and downs before major breakthroughs occurred in 2012 with the successful identification of cat images using deep neural networks. And the robotics field, which had been concentrating on industrial manipulators and mobile cars, has expanded considerably over the past 3 decades into other functional areas. Most medical, if you look at it, then most medical AI technologies focus on image-related areas because the AI technique has developed in the image recognition. So naturally, medical AI also have focused on the image-related areas, such as readings of X-ray and retinal images, electrocardiograms, and pathological slides. Although they currently function as a physician's aid, or using the analogy of self-driving cars at level 3, conditional automation out of level 5. So basically, if you look at this chart, the medical AI is supposed to function at level 3. So you need some kind of assistance from the step. But to become full automation is currently unreachable now. The field of medical robotics is led by surgical and rehabilitation robots, rehab robotics lagging far behind surgical robotics in market penetration. So basically, robotics has developed, like I said, the industrial manipulators and mobile cars. In the industrial manipulators has become a robot arm. So all the kind of social robots that we see is developed from industrial manipulators, which is a robot arm. And the mobile cart, which has been used in the factory automation, now has turned into self-driving cars. So the beginning was these two. But right now, as I said, the surgical robotics part is much more. As you can see, if you look at this chart, in 1990, the number of papers that is produced on the medical robotics just the 60 or something. But right now, 2012, 20, you have an enormous amount of the papers are published. So over the past 3 decades, there's an expansion, enormous expansion of the researches and the knowledge developed in the field of medical robotics. But if you look at the red lines, this is more like a surgical robotics field, whereas the green line is a rehab robotics. So basically, surgical robotics actually leading the field, and the rehab robotics are lagging far behind. As reflected in the Korean National Science Museum's description of the fourth industrial revolution as an intelligence revolution fused with AI and robots, the Korean government promotes medical AI and robotics. It sponsors a project called Dr. Answer to generate the platform for the personalized treatments of 8 disease categories, including cerebrovascular disease, cancer, and dementia. With the expansion of the surgical robot field, the state's need to domesticate similar devices became urgent. So you have Robotic. This is originally an American company, but it's they acquired by the Korean company in 2017. And this is a surgery for the joint surgeries, hip and replacement surgeries. The worldwide in 2017, there were 40,000 cases worldwide, but in Korea alone, they did 20,000 cases. So they're really pushing it. And also for the Da Vinci, the famous surgical robots, the Yonsei Severance Hotel has accumulated 30,000 cases this year. So they become a sort of designated as an epicenter. So so people coming over to Yonsei University to get training to use these Da Vinci robots. So the field has been, this is the case of if you see the graph, the cases just increased dramatically. Yeah. With this, meanwhile, the field of rehabilitation robots suffers from invisibility, although it is growing, particularly with the support of the Korea Institute for Robot Industry Advancement. Part of the reason behind this slow reception is financial. A package of Swiss-made rehab robotic systems, for example, cost a hospital owner about 1 billion won, which is like 700,000 US dollars. It's huge, very expensive, which is not cost effective in the absence of measures to recover the initial investments. A doctor who purchased the system even acknowledged that robots are no more than a marketing item. It's so expensive, when there's no sort of ways to recover its initial outlays. And this phrase was echoed in a small survey conducted among therapists. In this sense, the rehab robot field parallels the social robot sector in that the robot-based services do not live up to the hype. So the rehab robots this is all Korean-made ones, and these rehab robots are trialed in the Korean rehab, national rehab centers and Yonsei Severance robot rehab centers, and they just they sent to the land to the disability centers, other rehab hospitals. And X-Work Monimo, this is a private companies, which sort of develop the Hokuma style, Rokome style, the domestic robots. So why I say the social robots, the robot, rehab robot is similar to social robot sector is because we visited many places like the burger joint, and this is the one in one coffee restaurant. And if you look at the photo on the right hand side, you have a robot arm there. There's a coffee making robots, but actually they just there just as a show off. Actually, they don't really reduce the labor of the servers, or just to give a nice to look at it because this is a novelty item. So basically, but actually, social robot sector is growing a lot, and actually last year, the size of the sector is amount to the size of the manufacturing robot sector in South Korea. So it's really growing, but actually its functionality does not really meet the hype. So the Korea has the world highest robot density now. So it's growing, but its functionality is not live up to that. So I've been to many places, and if you look at this, and the only place that I think that made some business sense was this Robot restaurant, which is the untapped cafe during pandemic times. So you have, I'm gonna do the, play the videos. You have on the left-hand side, you have a coffee making robots over there, you can see. And then the other one is a delivery robot. So if you see that, the coffee making robots make robot and give it to the delivery robots. And this one then delivers along the path in the middle. And you have sensors on the ceiling. And then on the right-hand side, you have a cubicles because of the COVID restrictions, then people cannot sort of have a contact. So this is the, the only place that I think that makes some business sense. But otherwise, it doesn't really, fit the hype. Because, for example, there's one hotels that advertise the robot services and is on TV, on TV, they've been TV commercials for a long time. But I called them, and then they actually told me that you have to book like 3 days in advance, and then you can only deliver the towels and tissues, and then you should stay in a very specific quarter of the hotel. So actually, the person who got my call was really surprised. Why are you trying to get this robot services? It's not functional at all. So I'm going more to the robot-assisted rehabilitation now. Against this background, let us now explore the state of robot-assisted rehabilitation in South Korea. We'll begin by discussing the disciplinary nature of rehabilitation medicine and its key concept undergirding robot-assisted practice, namely neuroplasticity, before exploring robot-based practice further. As the name physical medicine and rehabilitation suggests, rehabilitation medicine has grown out of physical medicine, establishing itself from the experiences of both world wars. Similarly, in South Korea, it had its beginnings during the Korean War and was formed as a clinical discipline in 1972, although it has not enjoyed its current popularity as a specialty choice until the early 2000s, when the establishment of long-term care hospitals where elderly patients are cared for and rehab therapies reimbursed, and the rapid expansion drove the career prospect of rehab specialists. So if you look at this chart, from 2000 and year to 2015, you can see the growth in number of the hospitals. And if you look at the green bar, it's a long-term care hospital. So compared to the growth of the other hospitals, you can see in the 2000, you have only 60, but 2015, we have 1,372. So it's an enormous expansion of the sector. And there, you have physical therapists and rehabilitation specialists have to be there. And then if you have a rehabilitation physicians working in the hospital, you get a sort of a special bonus from the health authorities. So they have more incentive to hire rehabilitation specialists. So that's why their specialty, their popularity of specialty has grown a lot. So right now it's the #1 among medical school graduates, beating plastic surgery and beating ophthalmologists. Now rehab medicine become a really popular subject for doctors. So the growth of the rehab medicine, just like in the West, is very recent. It's only started in 1972. So the nature of the discipline straddling the realms of medical and social care differentiated from other clinical subfields and reflecting the efforts originally aimed at sending the wounded soldiers back to the war fronts through physical activities. It is defined to be team-oriented and multidisciplinary. So you have a very different, I think it's very unique among medical sub-discipline that we have such a diverse range of actors working as a team. Consequently, the discipline holds multiple, sometimes contrasting perspectives within it. Browse any textbook and you'll find treatment modalities whose rationale conflict with each other. Take, for example, the Bobas therapy or neurodevelopmental technique, the most frequently used treatment modalities, whereby the therapist assist the patient to move using key points of control and reflex inhibiting patterns based on the assumption that movement patterns are affected by the reciprocal innervation of two groups of muscles enabling certain movements. Agonists, these are called agonists, and those inhibiting them, these are called antagonists. Under this paradigm, therapists find the best ways to restore movement balance using key points of control, which exist along the body's gravitational axis, positing our body as a passive recipient of the force of gravity and therapist manipulation. Conversely, neurocognitive rehabilitation therapy, another central modality, is based upon a diametrically opposed rationale, as it centers cognition as the pivot of the rehabilitation process. In contrast to the NDT, the Bobas techniques focus on muscle reflexes and postural deviation. What is important for sensory motor recovery is then the cognitive process activated higher up in the neural hierarchy, while therapists invoke various cues, including visual images, to stimulate patients to be aware of the surroundings. So neurocognitive technique is quite different from the Bobas techniques, as I'm telling you. So under this neurocognitive paradigm, what gives our body kinematic integrity is not the functioning of the muscle movements primed to achieve balance, but our cognitive process coordinating our movements. So there's actually these two methods are diametrically opposed, but just the physical therapist and the rehab specialists just prescribing this, actually don't really, I think as this is considered to be a multidisciplinary, so they don't really, go to the root of try to integrate these different, the rationale that underpinning both of these therapies. The field of rehab robotics reflects this patch disciplinary identity, which manifests itself in the blurred boundary between therapeutic and assistive devices. The robot gait training system, whereby the patients are hoisted on a strap on a synced treadmill, is categorized as a therapeutic system aimed at facilitating the movement of extremities for therapeutic purposes, while lower body exoskeletons are categorized as an assistive device, focusing on the restoration of lost mobility. In reality, however, this distinction is hard to be sustained, as the former tends to have exoskeleton type devices fitted around the legs for gait stabilization, while the latter is also used for therapeutic training. The key principle underlying robot-based practice is neuroplasticity, and given that almost all research papers cite it as the theory legitimating their endeavor, its central role is clear. The theory presented by Donald Hebb postulates that the neural network, when its primary path is blocked, is plastic enough to generate alternative synaptic connections. Simply stated, as neurons that fire together, wire together, he wrote in the Organizational Behavior, which is the book written in 1949, when an axon of cell A is near enough to excite the cell B and repeatedly or persistently take part in firing it, some growth process or metabolic change take place in one or both cells such that A's efficiency as one of the cells firing B is increased. Based on animal experiments and developmental studies of children, it is believed that plasticity is present at neurochemical, cell, and behavioral level. The brain of musicians, with their auditory sensitivity and use of both hands, has been the frequent subject of study, and the presence in the electroencephalograph, this is the EEG signals, or the brainwave signals, of mismatch negativity on auditory event-related potential occurring when a sequence of repetitive sounds is interrupted by an occasional audible sound is believed to be an evidence that the musician's brain has been plastically transformed to best execute their musical talents. So basically, this is the findings that has been frequently cited in the discussion of neuroplasticity is that when musician hears some kind of strange sound, when they hear the general musical flow, the music or something, then even in unconscious level, when the EEG recordings show this kind of signals, so automatically they know something's wrong. So when they hear very strange sound that's disrupting the flow of the music that they are accustomed to, they have to show this kind of EEG signals. This is called the mismatch negativity. What this means that actually, without being aware of the context or any kind of cue, they can automatically, their body is just attuned to recognize this kind of audible sounds. So that's the sort of constitute the evidence of neuroplasticity that exists in the development of musician's brain. In the study using functional MRI techniques, Munte et al. Also reported among the musicians primary motor cortex, plenum tempora, and anterior part of corpus callosum. The areas corresponding to the hand movements and auditory inputs were enlarged than non-musician control group. Given that robot delivers high doses of training through programmable routines, it is understandable that theory of neuroplasticity is utilized to support their use. However, it is still unclear why the concept alone, among multiple theories in the rehab field, has been singled out. Because if you look at any kind of robot therapist, almost all, 100% of papers mentions neuroplasticity as their sort of ground, theoretical grounding of their research endeavor or engineering endeavor. So why? I mean, why 100%? Why this alone? An intuitive answer would be that it provides the best explanation for the clinical effects of rehabilitation, just as the theories of Darwin, Lavoisier, and Huygens did in the field of biology, chemistry, and physics, respectively. However, given the absence of top-down solutions, such as stem cell therapies, top-down meaning treating the sort of root cause of the neural damages. So regenerating the damaged neural tissues is from in the brain. And that's why it's called a top-down solution, because rehabilitation is called the bottom-up because it comes from the extremities and then try to have an effect on the brain, whereas the stem cell therapy is coming from the brain and they're going down. So it's top-down solutions. So there's no top-down solution such as stem cell therapies. It is also probable that neuroplasticity was chosen by the rehab and engineering communities to legitimize the bottom-up approach. Indeed, a rehab specialist I interviewed categorically said in relation to stem cell therapies that satisfactory treatments won't be available soon because we still know very little about our brain. Adding further that neuroplasticity-based rehabilitation regime is the only regime for the community to rely on. A robotic engineer I interviewed also threw light on this chosen aspect when he said, from my experience working in the rehab field, it seems that theories of rehab therapies are not properly established. Take neuroplasticity, for example. According to the theory, patients benefit from the repeated movements of body parts, but on second thought, repeated movements might not be so beneficial to patients at all because based on the theory, the patient's body can be adapted to the direction of the movement alone. So as I hear from him, I think it makes sense a little bit. So he just mentions neuroplasticity on his own accord. I didn't just mention any kind of theories, the similar to it, but he just mentions and told me this. As highlighted by Bezmes and Yadimic in the context of Turkey, patients have high hopes for the robots. And interestingly, they didn't distinguish the therapeutic and assistive function in robot use. In contrast with the doctors and therapists who emphasize the distinction on the grounds that active environment of patient is important for therapeutic effects to occur. One physician even claimed the biggest weakness of robot therapy is that the robots make the patients passive. Our investigation showed that patients really don't care. A patient suffering from Guillain-Barré syndrome who can walk only with a cane said, I have a strong hope to walk. using robots, I can speed up each stage. The robots will hold my body with security. If I can walk, I can do anything, improving my muscle strength and social activities. People think that patients will be very happy when they're able to walk, but that's not true. People want to walk with stability. Walking is nothing if you don't have stability under your feet as you fall easily. Whether it's used as an assistive device, I don't care. I have a strong hope for technology, and robots surely give us hope, the hope of working well. I would try robots if the sessions are not expensive. Another stroke patient has signed up for a 6-month clinical trial for arm rehabilitation at the National Rehab Center. It turned out, however, the regime was not smooth sailing, as it involved the experience of his arm being pulled mercilessly by robots and often getting painful botulinum toxin injections before every session. Still, he was contented to have received the expensive therapy for free. Almost all therapists surveyed also reported that the patient's aspiration for walking is absolutely great, and the response included a patient's remark that if I don't have any chance of walking, I will quit all this rehabilitation right away. Based upon these observations and insight, albeit limited in scope, we can extrapolate several points in relation to the use of robots in rehabilitation. First of all, under current circumstances, it doesn't seem to make business sense for private hospitals to establish a robot system. Hokuma's Rocomet, the robot gait trainer alone, costs more than 500 million won, 450,000 US dollars. Although the National Health Insurance began to reimburse 30 minutes of robot rehabilitation for stroke patients per day, with an additional user cost of 20,000 Korean won until 6 months from the disease onset, it is still a long way to make the robot therapy financially viable, given the long-term nature of rehabilitation. Secondly, robots do seem to reduce therapist labor, though not drastically. One therapist related to us about the experience of observing a robot session where a female therapist alone was successfully handling a paralyzed male patients. Actually, this is quite difficult. Actually, when the male patient is quite big and the female patients are actually quite hard time to, handling them to, for example, make them walk and do the step training and even do the, other physical trainings. The patient who volunteered at National Rehab Center also reported that 3 robot gait trainers and 2 upwarm robots, actually there's 5 robots there, were controlled by 3 therapists without difficulty. In other occasions, however, labor reduction was not impressive because, as we observed, it took about 15 minutes to prepare the patients for a Rocomet session, and strapping the patients onto the step training robot required more effort and time than in the traditional tilting table-based regime. So when the patients have a really total immobility and that they need to do the sort of a gravity exercise to feel the gravity on the on your foot. So they use what they call the tinkle table. So the patients lie on the table and the table is just raised with the tilting. So they have a step underneath so that the patients can just feel the gravity of their own weight. But one of the Hokuma system, there's a stepping robots. So I actually saw how they prepare patients to the stepping robots. It took really long time. 2 therapists actually strapping, and clicking. Just because part of the reason is because it's a safety reason, because it's a robot and they do the step training. So, but I found that it took more time for 2 therapists, actively involved. And actually, to the Rocomet sessions, they are on a working gait trainer. The Rocomet itself has been developed to reduce the labor of the therapist because you need 3 therapists to walk the patients. But actually, to prepare patients to Rocomet itself took about 15 minutes. So it's not labor reduction, to a large extent. Labor reduction is quite marginal in that case. Thirdly, given the current state of robot rehabilitation, robots are not likely to replace therapists. Rather, a specialist occupation called robot therapist has been created. As doctors and engineers shift their attention to how best to use the existing robots from what new robots can be developed. Finally, during our research, the brute and mechanical nature of robot devices, an aspect commonly glossed over in the literature, was highlighted by informers more than once. The patient who received the therapy at National Rehab Center described his experience like the following. The therapy was hard. You put your arm inside the machine. The machine holds your forearm while your hand is fastened, and it turns your arm with extreme force. It was painful. I know the mobility of my arm has improved after the session, but I won't do it again. Because if you look at the literature of rehab robotics, they think of a robot as a sort of a very friendly companion. And I've never seen a literature that the robot has this kind of, exerted force this way. But the patient was very, adamant that it was really painful. A therapist also mentioned about a session in which the patient's wish to take rest was denied by the operator on the ground. The patient had to finish the predetermined routine. So robot has its own routine. So, whatever the patient says, okay, I want to stop, and he has to finish the one routine anyway. One engineer even confided to me that the idea that patients had to undergo surgery on the knee joint before putting on the wearable robot as a way of preventing the attrition of soft tissues caused by repeated one-side movement is absurd. These are the aspects of robot-based therapies that contrast with the images conveyed by the media in which robots are portrayed as friendly companions, not steely objects making overbearing sounds to move patients' body parts. Cartoonist Kim Soo-jung published in 1983 a serial in which a robot called Yo-Yo learns about the world of humans. Fitted with artificial intelligence, she plays musical instruments, attends children's school, and leads an eco-friendly life, living on wasted oil and methane gas. She was produced by the engineers in the Seoul electronics market in Central Seoul, the quintessential marker of the rise of the Korean electronics industry. 40 years on, the Seoul market lost its former allure, reflecting the industrial transition that took place over the period and performs as a tourist attraction now, as it is filled with the small workshops, restaurants, and novelty stores. Some Royo-like figures locally produced, however, remained, and people, the minuscule pet robots waving hands and making pre-recorded sounds to visitors. So this is on the left hand, we have a Yo-Yo in 1983, and on the Pivo is 2022. It's a Pivo is being made in the Seoul electronics market. So it's a 40 years of difference. So this was the imagination. This was the reality after 40 years. Unlike imagination, whose boundaries nature defines any endeavor to contain it, a social imaginary, defined as an enabling but symbolic matrix within which people imagine and act as a world-making collective, can be explored as they are grounded in practice, material objects, and people's narrative. The aim of the paper was to engage with these imaginaries concerning technology, i.e. socio-technical imaginaries, which Jasanoff and Kim defined as a collectively imagined forms of social life and social order reflected in the design and fulfillment of nation-specific scientific and or technological projects. Concerning these imaginaries, hermeneutics scholar Paul Ricoeur claimed that these imaginaries have ideological and utopian variance, as the former is defined to be reproducing the existing order, while the latter question it. In the field of rehabilitation robotics, diverse imaginaries were in operation. Diverse imaginaries were in operation as they entangled in the intersection of state initiative, the aspiration of patients, engineers, doctors, and the market economy. So if you look at these slides, so Jasanoff and Kim proposed the idea of socio-technical imaginaries in 2009 paper, and originally is national socio-technical imaginaries. So that's more of a sort of concerned about the national project. And given that technology and science is quite much, closely related with the, economic improvements and political project, then it's understandable in a way that the, is quite a nation building is features quite centrally in the idea of imaginaries. And 2015, Jasanoff expanded the definition, and this time as a collectively held, institutionalized, stabilized, and publicly performed the visions of desirable future. It's about future now, animated by shared understandings of forms of life and social order attainable through supportive of advancing science technology. So Jasanoff actually also acknowledged that so the definition is evolving. So it's basically it can begin with a small number of people or some kind of a project, or it can be a national project or individual initiatives, right? Or on some kind of imaginary imagery for some kind of future. But only when the originator's vanguard vision, the kind of vision comes to be communally adopted, it rises to the status of imaginary, so social imaginary. So multiple imaginaries can coexist within a society, intentional, productive direct relation. So the definition is evolving. But we thought that although the idea of socio-technical imaginaries are very much useful and describing and analyzing the science and technology projects, but it still seems like focusing more on the political economic dimension, especially on national level technological orientation, rather than human agents, because it's imaginary. The imagination is being put forward by the people, human being. And and also Jasanoff, if you look at the 2015 paper, that actually the root of the concept to the Emil Durkheim. So in a way, it looks like this idea of, maybe it's because of the beginning, looks a bit Durkheimian or even structuralist in a way that it's quite it's quite like a fixed, it's something like doesn't capture the sort of, the change and social change side of the dynamics. So we like to sort of place the concept in the context of the sort of a broader debates on social imaginaries, because the Jasanoff also mentions that this idea, she wants to sort of explore the idea of the imaginaries, which she says is explain the function of a social function to the science and technology project. But if you look at the broader field of social imaginary, I think that this is a new kind of field that arising after the 1960s and 70s, I think, because each of them have a different intellectual genealogies, but still they say that three of these people are considered to be the main thinkers of social imaginaries. So one is Paul Ricoeur, the hermeneutic scholar, and he draws on more from the Geertzian side of symbolic anthropology to have this imaginary idea of imaginary, whereas Cornelius Castoriadis is coming from the Marxist idea, Marxist orientations, and Charles Taylor is applying more Weberian sort of a kind of orientations to the so what I mean by Paul Ricoeur is this. So I'm going to read the next slide. I'm going to continue to read. Our research revealed that those imaginaries resonate with each other at times and cause conflicts at other times. Specifically, we saw how the state's imaginaries built on driving the digital economy, namely the ideological variant. So I draw on the sort of idea of a social imaginary of the Paul Ricoeur, which he says is sort of a two major variants in the social imaginaries. So these are the two directions in our social understanding, directions of the he used this term, the understanding. So we have this ideological variants of our social imaginaries, and the other variant is the utopian version. So, so you have this ideological imaginaries sort of reproduce the existing social order in a way that these have this kind of conservative role, whereas the utopian mode of imagination. But he acknowledges that these are all, so he's a Marxist, Policker is a Marxist in a way, these are all false consciousness anyway. But still, we have this kind of a creative power derived from this kind of imaginations. So one is a sort of a imagination that trying to integrate society in a way that to rebuilding the patterning, consolidating existing order, which is called the ideological variant. The other one is more like a subversive, in a way that Buddha could be very inventive. So this kind of utopian version of it. So there are this kind of two versions of imaginaries there out there. So we saw how the state's imaginaries built on driving the digital economy. So these are we think is ideological variants are willingly accepted by entrepreneurial clinicians and robotic engineers who capitalize on government support and exploit a market opened up by those imaginaries. On the other hand, the imaginaries presented by some patients, clinicians, and therapist groups show mixed attributes, while others are dismissive of them, questioning the dominant medical imaginaries on the basis of the utopian version, as seen in the case of the patient with the Guillain-Barré syndrome. So medical, what I say, dominant medical imaginaries are the ones that the doctors and therapists are very strongly focusing on the distinction between therapeutic and assistive device. They're very strong on it. But actually, the patients that I interviewed said they don't really care. So defining, they define these dominant medical imaginaries. As the social imaginaries presuppose an understanding of society as a political institution, it's no wonder that the imaginaries concerning science and engineering projects feature nation building as its key elements, as evidenced in Kim. And this applies to what we have explored in this paper. And it seems that imaginaries of Japanese society exhibit similar characteristics. Robertson showed that Japanese robotics reproduce gender and family stereotypes in their imagined futures. And James Wright also testified to the same trend among Japanese AI researchers by highlighting an incident where a broom-wielding AI-powered female robot was collectively imagined. So these are the sort of ideological side of imaginaries. So they sort of try to reproduce the existing orders. In specific relation to rehabilitation, it is worth noting that Besmes and Yadimit's research show that normativity concerning the body is also reproduced during the rehab training as robots replicated the shape and function of our extremities. In that sense, a rehab specialist terse remark we encountered during fieldwork that engineers do not have to create Superman-like figures, as if the objective of the device is mobility, Sageways rather than robots is much better. It's worth our, I mean, he said that actually Sageways is much good for going to the same amounts of distance when compared to the using robots, just walking. So actually, he says you don't have to walk. If you want to move from point A to point B, actually Sageways is much better. So you don't have to move. But then again, the patients interview express their desire to walk. They want to walk. They don't want. I mean, they move, but they move using walking. So not to move. It's associated imaginaries being tied to the creation of the market. Indeed, the market economy is argued by Charles Taylor to be one of 3 important spheres of social practice drawing on social imaginaries. So another thinker that I draw on is Charles Taylor, as a philosopher. Canadian philosopher, and he's another thinker on modern social imaginaries. And so his definition of a social imaginary is what enables through making sense of the practices of society. So our contemporaries imagine the society enables us. So it's very similar in a way that the Paul Ricoeur and Jasanoff and Kim defined it. And he used it in a more broader context, and he tried to define more clearly. It is carried in images, stories, and legends shared by large groups of people. And that common understanding, which makes possible common practice, this is the implicit understanding we have. So it's quite interesting that Charles Taylor invokes the idea of social imaginary as kind of our ways. And so it is the practice which largely carries understanding. So basically, he tried to get to the bottom of the Western modernity, and he defines the current social imaginaries we have, which have ended up having such a hold in our imaginaries, we don't really realize it. Western modernity, say, so everybody in the globe is affected by Western modernity. But he thinks this as a long march. So he actually showed through historical reasoning that how this idea, social imaginaries that is created by Grotius and Locke in the 17th century, the theory of natural law based on the idea of natural rights that humans are supposed to have in the state of nature, the rights to life and liberty and property. So this idea of this conception of moral and social order has been like a 400, and it's 300 years, 3 centuries and more, slowly seeping into our consciousness, into our ways, our imagine our society. That's actually trying to get at through this idea of social imaginaries and how imaginaries are being sort of slowly infiltrate people's consciousness. And the theory of natural rights ends up spawning a denser web of limits to legislative exact function via the entrenched charters, and the presumption of equality implicit in the starting point of state nature has been applied in more and more contexts, so until it has such a hold on imagination. So basically, Paul Ricoeur says this is something like a philosophical anthropology, in a more continental tradition. So what we tried to do was sort of placing the Jasanoff and Kim's idea in a more sort of rich debate on the social imaginaries, so that basically, all these thinkers of social imaginaries have this kind of idea of human imagination as a sort of key modality and a key element in our social theorizing.
Seonsam,
so what remains?
Sorry to interrupt, but we're coming up to an hour's point. So if you're able to wrap up in the next few minutes.
Okay, I will. What remains then is the utopian elements in the imaginaries of rehab robotics. Kim Soo-jung's yo-yo signifies the utopian version of robot imaginaries as she cares for the family, the environment, and friendship. Although 40 years on, her real-life counterpart is people, the rudimentary toy robot reacting to visitors' simple commands. Is there any equivalent of yo-yo in the field of rehab robotics so that we could at least gauge the possibility of people-like products in 40 years' time? The answer seems to be negative, mainly because not enough public attention is paid to the disabled and those with paralysis to generate the utopian version of robotic products. Hence, no sizable market to exploit. Only the ideological version of imaginaries, where technological expertise and political economic interests lead the sector's development, seems to exist in the field of rehab robotics. Robot-assisted rehabilitation is a field undergoing rapid development, and the materials and the analysis are far from exhaustive. So the full investigation of the extent to which these imaginaries of the field, imaginaries occupy the public sphere was not possible. But our research at least showed how society, science, and technology are positioned in the broader context of medical robotics, rehabilitation medicine, and the futures envisaged by actors by exploring the state and practice of robot-assisted rehabilitation and the associated imaginaries held by key stakeholders in South Korea. So before I finish, if I introduce you the final some point on the result of the small survey that I conducted among 17 therapists. What interesting was that I did a survey on the robot reactors on all these therapists. And if you look at all the answers, most of the therapists are 20 and 30s. And then most of them didn't have experience with robots, and they generally have a negative view on the use of robots in the rehabilitation. So if you look at the fourth line, very few of them have interested in having, participate in robot therapies, and that they think the robot cannot replace therapies. Robot is a simply assist device, and installers of robot will speed up. No, everything is no. But interestingly, if you see that, they think of it, robot's effects will be similar to human or better. So this is quite interesting. And then I think that this is their subconscious expectation for the new technology, I think, because the general view is mostly negative and just a marketing item. But when the questions about the robot, about the effect of robot, they think that, okay, they will show similar or better result. And this might be sort of unconscious sort of preference for the public to the new technologies, that they might be the potential, some of the, reason for the Korean society low technological barriers. And then the reason for why they replaced the therapist, what they stated is that, they don't respond to the emergency situation, they can't provide the motivation, and that they don't have a sensibility, they can't have a rapport. But robot might be better in terms of they have a good sensors and strong force, and give a new experience to the patients. This is something that I think highlight. Thank you very much for your attention.
That's great. Thanks so much, Seonsam, for that really fascinating and really rich talk. So I'm going to use my position as chair to ask the first question, if that's okay. So one of the things that I found really interesting was your discussion of neuroplasticity as this kind of unifying theoretical concept behind the current generation of rehabilitation robots. And also, especially this blurred boundary between rehabilitation and assistive devices.
Therapy and assistive device,
and how they come to perhaps almost represent this imaginary of rehabilitating the aging national body, if I understood you correctly.
Sure.
So from your talk, it almost sounds like neuroplasticity acts as this kind of complicated sounding scientific jargon, but is also a kind of marketing tool, right? For the selling the robots. It's a concept that perhaps is quite difficult to prove. It kind of makes a kind of intuitive sense to users, and it makes them think that, okay, in the future, I'm going to be cured, not just assisted, but cured by this technology. And, it overcomes this stigma of assistive devices that implies, an ongoing dependence on the machines. Although it's one thing that I found interesting was, your patient that you quoted that said that they didn't care about that distinction. And you'd mentioned at the start some evidence, clinical evidence, suggesting that robot rehabilitation did work. I just wondered, and I'm not sure whether you mentioned this and I missed it, but I didn't really get a sense of how effective it was. Is it more effective than human therapy equivalent? So I guess my question is, how does the effectiveness of robot rehabilitation compare to other approaches to rehabilitation that you mentioned? Thanks.
Yeah, I mean, that's a very good question. Actually, so in terms of the effectiveness of a robot therapist, then it's your choice. So if you want to find the literature that robots are not effective, then you can find a lot of literatures actually saying that robot is not effective. But for equally in size of the literature that's being produced, they are saying that robots are effective. So it's a matter of your choice, actually. So you can't really say that the robots are really effective than human beings, but Korean authorities decide to reimburse the robot therapies from six to until 6 months. And I cited the subarctic stage from 3 months from the onset to the 6 months, as I say, in a very limited fashion, because they reviewed all the evidence, but the evidence was really marginal. So, but it's because of the health authorities, you know, because they have to be really strict. But interestingly also, as I talked to all the rehabilitation specialists, especially rehabilitation physicians, I asked them, do you think that robot therapy is really effective? And then they actually demur. They don't want to say anything about it, but say, so why do you think that robot therapy is not widely available? And the first thing they mention is about the reimbursements policy. Because they think that even though they are not sure of the therapies, they think that if the governments reimburse the therapy, they want to use it. So I think that, so it's really hard to really say that the robot therapy is effective. But if you read the literature very closely, then it's effective compared to, there are a lot of literature that comparing the conventional therapies. But like I said, it's of your choice. Which kind of literature you're going to pick.
Thanks a lot, Seonsam. Okay, I'm going to open it to anyone else who has a question. So please raise your hand or post your question in the chat.
Well,
yeah, Gonzalo, please.
Thank you so much, Seonsam, for this talk. I mean, it was incredibly rich, especially for someone who doesn't know much about South Korea. I have a couple of questions. Some of them have more to do with my curiosity about the larger context, okay? At least one of them has to do with my curiosity with the larger context, and the other one is more theoretical. Okay. So I'll start with the context question, which is really about political economy, okay? So I'm more familiar with the Japanese case via James, right? And I know kind of the political economy driving robotics and, you know, robot development in Japan. I mean, I would expect that similar issues are at play in the South Korea case.
Yeah, sure.
But you didn't really talk that much about that. And I would like you to, I mean, how much money is being committed by the Korean government to robotics development, and what is exactly the drive, the motivation, what is exactly the explanation that is provided to justify that public investment? Is it a matter of, I mean, I would assume population aging is one factor. Obviously, most of the people, the target population for these robots is the elderly population, I would assume. But are there debates like in Japan about shortage of care workers, robots as an option to, you know, bringing in foreign care workers? I'm a bit curious of this. What are the, you know, what are the larger political debates surrounding investment on robotic devices? Would you like to respond to that first?
Okay, yeah. I didn't go into the details of the sort of political economic side in my talk. And actually, the previous President Moon Jae-in, when he coming on to become a president, he actually proposed 10 Green New Deal kind of like a project, then invest huge amount of government money. And the 8 of them is all about the digital technologies in the AIs and the robotics. So our country is huge on the digital economy, and especially the metaverse, all these kind of cyber simulations, and all these new technologies, including robotics and AI. And the AI used to be a bit neglected in the beginning, but people just say, okay, we should know. So now, if you look at the university departments, there are like 40, 50, or 60, or even 100 AI-related departments in the university. So that's all because of the government funding. And the reason why government puts so much investment in it is because the Korean economy is just getting sluggish now, because it went on to the sort of plateau. You used to have like a 7 or 8%, but right now we are going to sort of an advanced stage. So we have like a 2% growth. I mean, that's the sort of a maximum. So they want to sort of focus on the areas that underdeveloped. So one is the pharmaceuticals. And we have a very, so from like 20 years, 15 years before, the government spent a lot of money on pharmaceuticals. These are the sort of area that is neglected. So they have a potential to drive the economy, because in a sort of a high value, it's a high risk, high return area anyway. So the government didn't have a incentive to go into it. But right now they don't have a choice. So they have to have the engine. And other one is the digital technology. So
yeah, but what are the justification? I mean, you use wonderful expressions: robot-based regime and human-based regime. Why not go for a human-based regime? I mean, what's the catch in the robot-based regime?
Actually, the robot in terms of the rehab robotics, I say the market is very small, so they don't really push it much, just as in surgical robots. So if there's a robotics field, the government funding is big. So most of them going to surgical robots, because the surgical robot field has market grown a lot. So there's an incentive to domesticate this. So they want to make an equivalent, Da Vinci equivalent. So this is a huge amount of money that's coming to them. But whereas rehab robotics, as I said, is invisible. So they are actually neglected. But still, there's a robot industry advancement institute. It's just the money is coming to them from the governments to keep doing it. So actually, so.
But it's already subsidized, you said, correct?
Yeah. Subsidized.
I mean, so it's invisible, but it's going mainstream. I mean, it's
compared to the surgical
everybody
robots.
Wants to be subsidized. That's the entry point for success, right? Yeah. So it's going mainstream.
And then I mean, the typical discourse of the lack of care workers and the population is aging is always being mentioned as just in Japan, but actually it's more like a market driven rather than the sort of a discourse, this kind of discourse driven as in Japan. Mm-hmm. So we have especially we have a lot of Korean Chinese migrants, Chinese care workers working in rehab hospitals as a carer. So it's slightly different from Japan because they speak Koreans and they know the culture. So a huge amount of Chinese Koreans actually coming over to do the care work here. So that's the sort of a bit of a different in context in the migration policies. So we have like a 50. I think that the Chinese Koreans are something like a 500,000, something like 300,000, more than 300,000 Chinese Koreans are working here, and then many of them working in the care sectors. So in terms of the robot robotics, it's more driven by the market. But one of the rehab specialists that I talked to was that he was involved in this sector for a long time. He has a really big hospital. He says it's a torch of hope. That's what he said. Rehab robots, because he keep trying. He bought a really expensive machine. They promise, but they don't really come to the sort of reality. So after 5 or 6 years, he's oh, but this is a torch of hope. He almost, he was really frustrated. He had a really strong hope for the rehab robots, and they're working in the government and as a sort of solution for the future aging society. But he says no. I think we need to think in different direction. That's what he told me at one point.
Mm-hmm. I mean, I have a theoretical question, but I don't know
sure.
if you want to open the floor to. I don't know if anybody would like to ask a question. If not, I might as well go ahead with it. I mean, I thought it was fascinating the way you opened up the Pandora box of the imagination and you brought in new questions in relationship to Jasanoff's concept of socio-technical imaginaries. I really like the way you discussed, the work of Paul Ricoeur and also the work of Charles Taylor. But I do have, I mean, maybe because this is a preliminary stage paper, you still haven't quite worked fully the connection between the theoretical framework and the ethnographic materials, right? And so, really it's a question about pushing you to kind of think through, how does your, the data from your interviews and, the discussions you've been having with various interlocutors, the engineers, the doctors, the patients, I suppose also the therapists, how do they, connect to the kind of framework to think about imagination in modern societies, of someone like Paul Ricoeur. I mean, I like your contrast between the ideological and the utopian kind of, framework of the imaginary, the ideological being more concerned with integration, with, I suppose, with nationalism as well. The utopian being more subversive. But I wonder, what shall we say when big players like tech industry companies deliberately use imaginaries to create utopian realities for the sake of making big bucks. Because to a certain extent, it seems to me that this strategy is working in South Korea to a very large extent. Utopian imaginaries have become ideological imaginaries, if you know what I mean.
Facebook mediated utopian imaginaries.
Yeah. So what's your reaction on this? Could you elaborate a bit more? I mean, how are you going to take this theoretical framework further?
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, I thank you very much, Dr. Santos, for the comments. I think that's a really important point, because in a way that all this digital, the discourse are actually, we almost become a slave of the sort of a big tech, in a way, the Facebook and Instagram. And in Korea, we have KakaoTalk and Neighbors and Ubers. And so in a way that's true. I mean, that's the imagined, the utopian version of it that we might encounter in the field, or might be sort of a, the version, utopian version provided by the big tech and the other people who wants to sort of ideologize their own interest in a way but still, if you go into that direction, I think that it looks like it becomes too materialist kind of account of our social being, I suppose. So in a way that the money is there, economy is there, and then sure, I mean, we are affected by it. So I mean, I still have to think hard on the issue. But while I'm just trying to, I mean, we still need to gather more data, and we need more interview with the rehabilitation patients and engineers, especially engineers, because patients, it's very hard to get access to patients because there are very few of them actually to do the rehab therapies. I said we have out of 17, only 2 just have been observed the rehab therapists in their 5 to 6 or 7 years of experiences. So it's very rare, but still we need to talk more to the engineers and the rehab specialists and others, and if possible the interviews, the patients. But our sort of a hunch, our orientation is trying to sort of savor this kind of a human agency side. That's, for example, like the Guillain-Barré syndrome patient, that his hope was really strong. He wants to really work. He works really hard. He's 35, age 35. He really wants to sort of regain his working abilities, capacities. And then, but at the same time, he's quite tech prone. And so that's why he have a really strong expectations for the new technology. But the only problem for him is the money, because it takes really long time. So even if you just pay the small amount of money at the beginning, you have to do it like in almost, you could at least 2 or 3 years, almost for a lifetime. So it takes a really, it becomes really expensive for him, even if it's available. So I don't know. Well, but I mean, we will have to more. So going to more sort of a theoretical, depth in terms of the sort of phenomenology, for example. So if you go into that direction, then it becomes really hard to sort of the placing our narrative more like a socio-technical or sort of a socio-economic political the elements. So but I hope that we can find some middle ground so that we can save some of our agencies in a way that even though it's not entirely free, still showing some sort of a break from this kind of a political, economic, or materialist, or the ideological frames that we are under. I don't know if this is a satisfactory answer, but we'll try.
Thank you.
Yeah, please go in. Go ahead.
Well, it's a very exciting talk, very informative. I just want to, 2 lines, comments and question mixed together, continues the discussions that Gonzalo raised. First is, again, sorry, but bring back the economy side, is to what degree the social welfare system actually support the use of robots, care robots. So I'm just wondering, because you already mentioned, because one of the patients says, okay, if the state is paying for it, the government is paying for it, I'm happy to use it. So I wonder, other than the industrial side of the story, government investment in industrial development, how social welfare system has been reworked to support this kind of initiative, intentionally or unintentionally. So, I mean, that's sort of the story I wanted to get on. I don't want to use the term consumer, but sort of the care receiving side, care recipients, experience that, how that kind of, economic structure that makes it possible or less desirable. Second is also on the socio-technical imaginaries, because I recently published an article, also used the same concept, but talked about techno nationalism. And I also drawn Jasanoff, the socio-technical imaginaries, and also Charles Taylor's work. But I take a slightly different I read a little bit different. So instead of juxtapose the social imaginaries, Jasanoff's concept with Paul Kirk, I focus on, the distinctions between ideology and utopia. I also draws on a lot of discussions on nationalism by anthropologists, because that's the part I find it maybe actually address some of the issues that you talk about. In particular, for example, a Japanese scholar, Tini, I always have difficulties in remember her name. She talks about actually how, nationalism mobilized by the state discourse is very important. However, she talks about the soldiers during World War II, why the soldiers actually bought into that idea. So seemingly, it's sort of like, you can say it is very overarching, very Dahamian, but if you look carefully into it, under the cover of nationalism, the imaginations, actually, the individual's imagination can be quite different from the state's narrative. They impose nationalisms, even though they both draw on the same symbols, the cherry blossom. So I think in this case, what we are talking about is both science and technology in this front can imagine they are the symbols, of course, they're the symbols, but the kind of imaginations that what the tech company comes with, the imaginations will be quite different, may actually be quite different from what the government's imagination. And that imaginations may also be different from individuals' imaginaries. They probably overlapped in the sense, in my article actually talks about it. There's a strong, that you can call it ideology or something. James Scott called it hyper-nationalism, hypermodernism, the belief in science and technologies that drive society forward. They share part of it, they overlap in part of it, that through, I explain in my article to say in the China's case, that's because the school education really pushed hard on that directions, the promise science and technology. But at the end, but if you look at how individuals why did they actually buy into it? Is even to stay in, in a country like China, the government is very strong, very powerful, pushing forward for nationalism. If you read them carefully, individuals' imaginaries about science technology do not always in line with the government. When they do have their own course, why do they buy into at least part of it? And I think that's Charles Taylor actually mentioned in his book, that individuals, their engagement with ordinary people do not understand. I think this is an original quote. Ordinary people often do not understand their social surroundings in a disengaged theoretical terms. So they draw on their life experience and images and narratives, and they form their own imaginaries. So I think it's your sort of your material speak to me is sometimes actually is a mixture of those, which is exactly I think is most interesting. It partly conform that kind of a positive optimism, that almost like crow optimism way. But at the same time, you also see that they also draw on different resources to contest it. So it is an imaginary that actually have a lot of mix. I think that the concept, as you mentioned, I totally agree. And it also strikes me, Jasanoff strikes me a little bit too rigid, too collective, but at the same time,
June, sorry, can I just, I mean, clearly you guys have a lot to share. Maybe you could send Seonsam your paper. You know?
that might be really great.
Yeah, and I think I don't know if you still have another question. It's just that it's already 11:30. So you asked the first question.
First one,
the second question.
Okay, so do I answer the first question first?
Why don't you go ahead, Seonsam?
Actually, social welfare is right now, the disability centers, a lot of disability centers, local disability centers are installing the care robots, the rehabilitation robots now. So it's increasing, it's really increasing fast. And it's a mix of, it's an initiative by one of the state authorities who like to sort of push forward these domestic rehab robots, and they subsidize them and then deploy them in the disability centers. And also at the same time, the local government is very happy to have this kind of new welfares coming in to their own jurisdictions, so that they can have a better chance of being re-elected in the next elections. So, so in general, the social welfare sector is in terms of the deployment of the rehab robots is clearly increasing, and it's a clear trend. And in general, in social welfares, in the sector that really care about the robots, I think that's the I didn't really look into it, but it's some incidents of using care robots, but I don't think that the rehab robotics are much more sort of a specialized field. So in the social welfare sectors, doesn't really pay attention to this kind of field, I suppose. I think this is more like driven by the Robot Institute and the Disability Center, and with a small fee, they are being used by the local people who need rehabilitation need, but disabled people, and then they are getting it for sort of according to their own disability stages. So according to the reimbursement, the government meals and the ways, but it's not that expensive. So because they're heavily subsidized by the government, so it's increasing. For the second question, I think it's really informative, and I really want to read the paper to have this kind of sort of interlocking of various imaginaries, and how we can sort of go about this kind of rigid frames of the when you say nationalism is sort of fixed and it's out there, we can move around, but still using the idea of imaginaries, we can just have more tools to just describe and analyze, how the society, how people operate in Korean society. I really want to read the paper. Thanks for the comments.
Okay, that's great. Thanks, Seonsam. So we're at time. Christina?
Hi. It's a short question.
Yeah, sure.
Thank you for such wonderful presentation. I was thinking about one thing that you said about the patient narratives. Between the difference between walking and to move. Okay. So I think this is it can be very interesting to analyze further, to think about the human agency, the role of the human agency in the use of those rehab robots. So it's depend on your ethnographic research with those patients, I think. To understand those lived experiences, not only the exploration, but the lived experience along these rehab robots. And I think if you, in the theoretical level, I don't think if you can go through the anthropology of the body. For example, Marcel Mauss on the techniques of the body, or also the Pierre Bourdieu, the theories of social practice. Because I think to think about the balance between the social structures and the human agency, I think this is a question, an important question in your work, I think, from my perspective, because your presentation was so complex and full of
Sorry about that.
such information that I need to a lot to think about that. But this is the first comment that emerged in my head. So to talk with you, I don't know if this makes sense, but it's the difference between walking to the patient and to move. I think this distinction in the emic perspective, I think it's very interesting to think about this issue. Okay, it's just that. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think that's I think it's a really crucial point in a way that the work is what humans doing, what just animals, doing as well as living animals. I mean, living beings are doing. Whereas the move is focusing on the act of moving. It can be, buses can move, cars move, objects can move. So it's the idea of work is a completely different. I think, as you mentioned, that the idea of robots is actually objects. So objects actually move. They don't walk. But we sort of humanize them. So I think this is a really crucial distinction to make. I think it's quite essential. Thank you for highlighting it. This is really helpful to think through.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much for the comments.
Okay, great. So yeah, now we really are at time. So it just remains to say thank you very much to Seonsam and also Yunjong for her work on this as well. And to our audience for the really great comments and questions. So stay tuned for the special issue of East Asian Science, Technology and Society, which is going to feature Seonsam and Yunjong's paper sometime next year. And I don't know, Gonzalo, if you want to advertise the next talk in this series, or maybe it's not decided yet, the date.
Oh, yes, that makes sense. So our webinar series on innovation automation months on December 22, we're going to go to China to learn about industrial automation and workers' reactions in South China, following the lead of Huang Yu from Minzu University of China. So stay tuned to our social media and see you in December. Thank you so much.
Right, thanks everyone.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.